Hey, Travis.
Hey, Stephen, how's it going?
It's going really well, actually. Really excited about this next question that we've got in front of us. So let's get right into it.
Yeah.
What is the point of following Christ? That's a kind of an aggressive point, but I love that question.
Yeah. It's kind of a bare bones, just
It's a
down to the
raw,
point
yeah,
question.
absolutely.
Yeah, and I think there are multiple true ways that I could answer it. We could say that the reason why we follow Jesus is because in Him we have the forgiveness of sins, which is true. We could say that the reason we follow Jesus is because He's the Lord of all creation, which is true. We could say that the reason we follow Jesus is because God raised Him from the dead, which is also true. And all of these would be in and of themselves right and compelling reasons to follow Jesus.
Okay.
But let me kind of tackle this from a roundabout way and ask a different question to kind of orient us. So why is it that we use a hammer to drive nails?
Good question. I have a little bit of an answer.
Okay, yeah.
In the Stow house the other day, I didn't have a hammer at hand and I used a wrench.
How'd that go for you?
Not well. Dented the wall. The nail went in, but not well.
Right, yeah.
You know?
Right, because that's not what a wrench is for.
Okay.
Right? So a hammer is for driving nails.
Okay.
That is the purpose of a hammer. It can maybe do a few other things, but what it is created for, what it is designed for, is to drive nails into wood, into concrete, into walls.
Indeed.
In the same way, why do we follow Jesus? I think you could answer it like you answer the hammer question. Why do we follow Jesus? That's because that is what we were created for. That is the purpose of humanity, is that we were created to have communion with God. I wouldn't say several thousand years ago, about 1,500 years ago, there was a bishop in the early church, a guy named Augustine in the city of Hippo.
You've got a cat named after Augustine.
Absolutely named after him. So Augustine the bishop, not Augustine my cat.
Right, okay.
He spent the first 30 years of his life chasing everything that the world had to offer.
Okay.
He chased everything that he had been told would provide life and fullness and joy. So he was wildly promiscuous. He was a glutton. He was a drunkard. He joined multiple different cults.
Wow. Food, sex, booze, and religion. Excellent.
Yeah,
Okay, all right. This
conceivable
guy was
thing.
getting it done.
He lived life to the fullest in every way that the world said you should live your life. And around 30 years old, he converted to Christianity. And
So he didn't find fullness then?
No,
Okay.
he didn't ultimately. It nearly destroyed him.
Okay.
But after he converted to Christianity, he wrote an autobiography called The Confessions of St. Augustine. I guess
Okay.
he didn't call it that. He just called it Confessions. And in the opening paragraph, he says this: "You have made us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until we rest in thee." What Augustine, I think, came to realize is that living his life chasing after sex, chasing after food, chasing after sort of fringe religious movements was like using a wrench to drive a nail. It's not what he was created for, and it was never going to work. And what he realized was that what he was created for, what human beings are created for, is to have fellowship with God and to be united to Christ.
Okay.
And that was the only place where he ever found fullness of life. And so I think that's why we follow Jesus, because that is where fullness of life is found. That's what we're made for.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's incredible. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he asked this question: "Is this why? Why Jesus? Why Christianity? Just why?" And I said, "What did we learn about the Bible?" He's a Christian. He's just
asking questions.
Just
Yeah,
asking great questions.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, "Well, why did Jesus come?" I said, from the lips of Jesus himself in the Word, we learn this. Jesus said, "I have come that you might have life." But he didn't stop. He said, "I've come that you might have life and that you might have it to the full." And so that was profound, is that Jesus himself is teaching that in him is life. And he is all about the fullness of joy within you.
Right.
So the greatest thing that you can experience in life, knowing that sex, booze, drugs, the whole thing, on some level, those things can bring a great deal of relief or joy or whatever for a very temporary period of time.
Right.
And yet the fullness of joy, the fullness of those pursuits, they're
empty,
die.
ultimately.
Absolutely. They're empty.
You know what that reminds me of is a quote from a church father named Irenaeus. I think in the last video,
Yeah.
I quoted Irenaeus, but the quote was actually from Gregory of Nyssa.
Oh, well, I'm glad you corrected that.
So,
Okay,
so
excellent.
this one is actually Irenaeus.
Actually Irenaeus.
This is
All right.
actually Irenaeus.
Stand by, actually
Yeah, so
Irenaeus.
just so you know,
Here
we
go.
will correct this in the third video. So Irenaeus, in one of his sermons, he says, "The glory of God is man fully alive." And
See, I love that.
Yeah.
I so agree with that because I don't think that God is glorified in our begrudging submission. All right, fine. I guess I'll just do it this way.
Yeah.
That's not what brings God glory. And the truth is that's not what brings us joy.
Right.
So people who serve a God who they think is just going to come down and crash on them is they've got a misperception of who God is.
Right, and I think when we come down to it, I mean, it's tattooed on my arm. In him is life. This is the opening of John's gospel. Later in John's gospel, he says, "This is life, that you would know God and the one whom he has sent." And so I think that
come
this
on.
is why we follow Jesus, because there is only life in him. Because that is who we were made for. We were made to be united to Christ. And in him we find the fullness of life. Now, I think we have to be really clear. That doesn't mean you get everything you want, or that your life...
That is 100% true.
Right. It doesn't mean that your life in the physical, temporal sense is always going to go how you hope it will. I think of
But
Paul,
we don't get
yeah.
everything we want, even if we're not pursuing Christ.
Right.
And to assume that there's a magic genie in the sky that's going to do that is to misunderstand who God is,
Yeah.
and it's to misunderstand the reality in which we're placed.
Yeah. I think of the Apostle Paul. He writes in Philippians, I consider all things rubbish compared to the surpassing worth of knowing Christ.
He wrote that in prison.
Exactly. And this is what I think we get to the heart of. We are created to know God and to behold God in the face of Jesus Christ. And what we gain in following Jesus pales, or what we lose by following Jesus, pales in comparison to what we gain by knowing him. And this is what Paul discovered, is he could lose everything. But what he had gained in Christ was what life was really about. And what he lost in following Jesus were secondary things that couldn't hold a candle to Christ himself. And so why do we follow Jesus? Because in him is life. And the glory of God is man fully alive. God has made us for himself, and our hearts will be restless until we rest in him.
That's awesome. Thanks, Travis. Appreciate it. We'll see you in the next question.
Awesome.